Welcome back to my channel. I'm Traben, these are my tomes, and welcome to the first in a series I'm tentatively calling Tomes to Try, in which I will offer comp titles to some of my favorite reads. I read a lot of books. A few years ago, I read 365. Last year it was over 200, and this year looks like I'm going to be somewhere between those two numbers. I frequently find myself comping titles to others because I read rather prolifically, so if I know someone's taste in books or I know some of the things that they've read, I can usually say, here are 2 or 3 things that I think are worth you checking out and you might enjoy them. And we're going to start the series off with probably my favorite piece of media, full stop, with One Piece. So let's talk about it. I did sit down and try to think about what are the things about One Piece that are appealing and attract so many people to read it and enjoy it. I tried to break up my recommendations into a couple of different categories. I'm going to start with probably the easiest group to pivot from One Piece if you are a reader of manga, and that is going to be titles that Eiichiro Oda has endorsed himself. So in my heart of hearts, I would like to recommend Eyeshield 21 in this category, but unfortunately that is long out of print. It was a book ahead of its time, really entertaining, and I feel like of all the things I'm about to talk about, Eyeshield is probably the title that most closely resembles One Piece in tone. The first title we're going to talk about that Oda has put his seal of approval on is The Promised Neverland. Now, keep in mind that Oda endorsed this as it was coming out, and most people's hesitation with starting the series, or their biggest gripe with the series, is the conclusion. I've read the first 3 or 4 volumes of this manga, and I found it very gripping from the start. So The Promised Neverland follows Emma, Norman, and Ray, 3 students or 3 kids in this orphanage that seems idyllic and peaceful. There are a couple of rules they're supposed to follow about like where not to go and things like that, and they're watched over by this motherly figure. One night they sneak out and they see something that reveals the dark truth of the world that they inhabit, and the book from there becomes this like cat and mouse game of them trying to get out of their situation, and those who want to do them harm trying to keep them in place. There's a lot of like feints and double bluffs and things like that. As a fan of like the gambling subgenre, where a lot of the plot is moved forward by these lies and half-truths and these schemes, I found that part very compelling and very interesting. It is not anything like One Piece. And again, I know there are issues with the end of the book, but if you want something that's more of like a mystery thriller feeling, but still has that found family aspect, still has that like gathering together of people and wanting to see them protected, those themes are in here. It's just presented in a completely different package. Another Oda endorsed manga is Akane Banashi. This is the story of Akane, whose father was a Rakugoka, a person who performs Rakugo, which is live storytelling theater, and he was going up for a certain level of Rakugoka, and everybody in that entire class was failed and dismissed. And so Akane has made it her life's mission, more or less, to become the greatest Rakugoka ever, and enter these different tournaments. You see a lot of the inner workings of the Rakugo community and the way that the different houses, the different families interact with one another. There are endnotes in these books about the actual history and practice of Rakugo, of these live story performances, which I think is really cool. Here, I think the tone is more in line with One Piece in that it is more of a lighthearted. In this case, far less fantastical. This is more like a slice of life type story, but we still have a lot of those similar ideas of family. It feels a lot like a sports manga, honestly, in that she has to go to these competitions, she's gradually improving, and you learn a lot of different facets of the art, from knowing the history of the stories to being someone who has a voice that can modulate into a lot of different characters, or having overwhelming personality, being very charismatic. All these different elements of what makes a good performer are explored in here through the different characters she comes across. And she comes across a number of really crazy characters, a lot of fun. I love this series, and I've been singing its praises on this channel for a while now. But the fact that Oda also recommended it gets it on this list. And the final manga that I'll be talking about in this section is Ultimate Exorcist Kyoshi, which is the newest title on this list. I think volume 4 just got released in Japan. I don't have a copy of this one. This is available online, I think on Viz's website. I'll put the link down in the description. You can read the first 3 chapters for free. I did want to get a copy of this because if you've ever seen a Japanese manga, you might notice that they have these like little wraparounds on them. And the first volume of this and Akane Banashi, and I believe one of the volumes of The Promised Neverland, had these wraparounds with like Oda's name on them to say like Oda recommends this. That's a selling point in Japan. One Piece is the highest selling manga, or was the highest selling manga for years in that country. And so to have his name on it is definitely going to push numbers and sell copies. Ultimate Exorcist Kyoshi is actually written by someone who was an understudy of Oda, which puts that connection much more direct between the two titles. It looks artistically to me more like Fire Force than it does to One Piece, but I definitely see the appeal here. We follow Kyoshi. He is an amazing exorcist in this world of demons and ghosts. He is like high ranked, and he's not even really out of school yet. But he's also terrified of ghosts, which I found was a really amusing pivot for the story. Now, again, this art more reminds me of Fire Force than it does One Piece, but there are definitely some designs in here that push that One Piece aesthetic. While I've only read the first handful of chapters, I can definitely see how this could turn into something with the same charm and amusement that you get from One Piece, with the eccentric characters, the focus on friendship, and a character with a amusing, defining flaw. Another one to check out if you're into that fun, frantic energy that you get from One Piece. Now we're going to switch gears and talk about books that I feel scratch the similar itch as One Piece for a variety of different reasons. We're going to start with the most obvious and probably the most superficial that I could think of, which is just, what are some good pirate stories? What if I read One Piece because I just love pirates? A few titles that I've found that I think would fit the bill here are The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi. This one definitely hits a lot of the same notes as One Piece, where you have the found family crew, you have the magic in the world where there's all sorts of fantastical creatures and sea beasts and these amazing powers and things. And it's primarily a story about coming together to overcome a great evil in the world. Now, as a protagonist, Amina shares almost nothing in common with Luffy. She is an older woman who has a daughter and has given up the life of piracy, but she's called in for one last job to make an obscene amount of money. And while she justifies it, saying, this will help my family for the foreseeable future, my children's children won't have to worry about putting food on their table or making any money, she gradually admits that part of her wants to get back into that seafaring life and go on these epic adventures. She's also acrophobic, which I found was an amusing flaw. So there's just so many things in here that really did give me those feelings of, especially like early One Piece, where it was just like jumping from island to island and seeing all these crazy things and fighting these little minions. There's not a unified, like, overarching story yet, although that is hinted at toward the end of the book. But if pirates are your thing, if you love One Piece because you're all about the pirate life, then this is definitely one to check out. Sticking with the pirate theme and other like ne'er-do-wells, I would also recommend Red Seas Under Red Skies, the second book in the Gentleman Bastard series, where our protagonists briefly become sailors, briefly become pirates, but really they are thieves. And the story is about like one-upping the aristocracy, the rich, that Robin Hood-esque kind of attitude. I would read the first book, The Lies of Locke Lamora, before diving into this one. But Lies of Locke Lamora is more solidly thief-coded, I don't know, but definitely has a lot of the same things I'm going to be touching on with so many of these titles. Found Family, we've got the underdogs, the characters who are, you know, considered the bad guys in the eyes of society, but are trying to do the morally correct thing at the end of the day. But I had to shout out Red Seas to Red Skies because they're pirates in this one. Still sticking with Found Family, still sticking with the idea that our protagonists are ne'er-do-wells and thieves and murderers and, you know, the dregs of society. We've got Six of Crows. Now, the major difference here between Six of Crows and Lies of Locke Lamora, Red Seas Under Red Skies, is that this is a YA title. So it's far less graphic in a number of ways, but I don't feel like that makes it any less potent of a story. I know some people take issue with the characters being so young and being as successful as they are, but I don't really find any issue with that. This follows Kaz, who is the leader of a group of thieves within the city. He gets a crew together to basically do a jailbreak, so like a reverse heist story, which is a lot of fun. There's magic in this world as well. There's magic in Lies of Locke Lamora, but it's not nearly as pronounced as it is in some of these other titles. Yeah, you get this ragtag group of, a sorceress and a prisoner and an assassin and a gangster, sharpshooter. You got a lot of the same archetypes that you'll see in One Piece. Getting them together, going and doing a job, going on these misadventures, seeing them band together and have those big heroic moments is a lot of fun. It gives me the same feelings that I get out of a good One Piece volume. What if you don't care about any of that? What if you're only reading One Piece because it is hands down the craziest manga, besides maybe JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, to grace the comic book shelves? You know, you got rubber men, you got people who whose boogers explode, all sorts of crazy powers. What if you're just in it for the absolute bonkers powers and characters and this insane world? Well, then you should look at Battle of the Linguist Mages. This is a hard book to describe because of how insane it becomes. Essentially, there is a video game that uses sound to cast magic, because it turns out that if you use your voice in a certain way, you can create magic. You can make things that you imagine just exist or not exist. Also, and I can't stress enough how just out of left field this is. In this universe, punctuation are extra-dimensional beings who are at war with each other for the minds of humanity, and they have a herald on our Earth for, I think, the semicolon, I think is what he is the herald for. It's completely nuts. This book is insane. And by the end of it, you have these gigantic, like galactic level fights going on, kind of escalates to the nth degree. I'm not saying this is the best written book that I've read in a while, but I will say that it is one of the most interesting. And if you're willing to turn your brain off for a moment and just enjoy the insanity of this ride, I think you'll really get a kick out of it. And I think that's true for a lot of elements of One Piece as well. All right, but what is my number one recommendation? What is something that is going to unite all these different things, where you've got an underdog going up against a corrupt government? You've got this found family element, this group of misfits and outcasts who are going to come together with their wacky powers and overcome the man and, show society what's really going on. You got crazy powers. It's got everything that you could possibly want as a One Piece fan, and that's going to be Dungeon Crawler Carl. Now, this is the third book in the series, but I wanted to get this cover because you can see Carl has he got a dinosaur and a cat run away from a train. This is the story about the end of the world. The inciting incident happens very quickly, so I don't feel like it's a spoiler. Anybody who's inside at the start of this series just flat out dies. Every building collapses to the floor, and the people who are outside, these portals, these staircases down to a subterranean level appear, and it is explained to them that their planet, Earth, has been basically mined for resources, and as part of that process, they're going to take part in a dungeon delving game that will determine the fate of their planet and the fate of the runners, the dungeon crawlers. And from there, you have Carl, who is just a guy in some boxer shorts with a cat, going down and doing his best to dive as deep into this dungeon as he can. This is a lit RPG title, which means that there are RPG elements in here that are known in universe. Like, he levels up, he gets stronger, and he knows about his stats, he knows about his character class. Like, all these things are like factual information that he has. And this goes off the rails so hard. There is a whole plot about the people who are running this game, and there's all this foreshadowing for one of the floors where the corporations are going to come in and they'll have avatars for themselves within the game, and how that's a really dangerous place to be. It's a very dangerous floor to go down into. We've got Donut the cat, who is probably both one of the funniest characters in the story, but also one of the more poignant as I've gotten further and further into the series. I legitimately care about this character more than I thought I would when it first started up. Donut is his ex-girlfriend's pageant cat, by the way. So yeah, there's so much overlap between One Piece and Dungeon Crawler Carl, more than I ever thought there would be. Another thing I will say, to its credit, is that the overarching story of Dungeon Crawler Carl is obviously very meticulously thought out and well planned. From book one, we have these hints about things that are going to happen in the future. We have these plots set in motion that don't pay off for 2 books, 3 books, 4. Some of these things have not come to fruition yet, and the situation is always evolving, and in ways that are that make sense within the world, because the world building is also very strong, but also in ways that make it feel cohesive, because you have all these things working in the background. Every book is a floor of the dungeon, so you have that plot being explored, but above that is the overarching story, these long form narratives that are spliced into the story as it goes on. And it's just an incredible read. I fully believe that if you are a fan of One Piece for any reason whatsoever, you should check out at least the first volume of Dungeon Crawler Carl and see if it's your thing. I could possibly be seen getting turned off by the humor, which is not the same as One Piece humor, but beyond that, they share so much in common that I think this would be my #1 comp title if you are a fan of One Piece. And that's going to do it for me today. Please let me know down in the comments below, what would you recommend if someone was a fan of One Piece? What are your comp titles for Oda's magnum opus? Also, feel free to suggest names for this segment. Again, I'm going to call it Tomes to Try for now. But I'm open to suggestions. As always, I hope your reading journey is going well. Like if you liked the video, subscribe if you want more. Help us grow this corner of our BookTube community. And until the next one, take care.